And I know that many of us here grew up in Sunday schools. Right? Sa Sunday school, naalala ko, lagi tayong pinapamemorize ng mga passages ng scriptures. And also, hindi lang sa Sunday school, kung hindi maging saan po, maging sa DVBS, sa Daily Vacation Bible School po natin. And of course, one of those words, one of those passages na napaka-importante, na napakagandang gamitin bilang praying in the scriptures is Psalm 23. Naniniwala po ako na marami sa atin dito yung nakakaalam ng Psalm 23. And perhaps this is considered as the most familiar and the most famous of all the passages in the book of Psalm. And this morning, as we are going through the series of prayers, we will be using this passage right now as our prayer sa umaga pong ito. This is Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Bigyan ko lamang po kayo ng kaunting konteksto dito sa Psalm 23. This psalm was written by King David. Most probably, this was written during the time that his son, Absalom, wanted to overthrow him from the kingship. Dahil ang gusto ni Absalom, because of his greed, gusto niyang siya ang maging hari kahit hindi pa nararapat at hindi siya yung dapat na pumalit kay King David. It was a very painful moment in the life of David because he was being betrayed by his son. So what David did was to run away to the Jordan River, going to Gilead, where he met si Barzillai. Barzillai is actually a shepherd. Pag sinabi natin shepherd, minsan iniisip natin, baka mahihirap tong mga taong ito. But Barzillai was not. He was a wealthy shepherd and he was very loyal to King David. And doon sa nais ni Absalom na patalsikin ang kanyang ama, na si King David sa pagiging hari, katulad po ng nabanggit ko kanina, what King David did was to run away from the Jordan River going to Gilead, and that is where he met Barzillai. At doon po muna siya nagstay habang inaayos ang gusot sa pagitan ng kanyang mga tauhan at sa rebelyon na nagaganap against him. And so what he did was to write Psalm 23, reminding himself that despite of his circumstances, despite of his predicament, the Lord will still be his shepherd. He remembered who God was to him, despite of his circumstance. And you see, this is a psalm na marami po sa atin ang makaka-relate. I just gave you a very brief backgrounder of the context kung papaano po naisulat ang Psalm 23. King David was grieving. King David was in pain because he was being betrayed by his son who wanted to overthrow him from the kingship. And this is Psalm 23. Babasahin ko po. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Manalangin po tayo. Lord, as we come before you this morning, we are very much grateful to remember that you are our shepherd. Open our hearts, and may your name and your name alone be glorified in our midst. This is our prayer for Christ's sake. Amen. You know, the first sentence in Psalm 23 states, the Lord is my shepherd. Tingnan po muna natin kasi napakagandang isa-isahin noong sentence na ito, the Lord is my shepherd. The translation in Hebrew is Yahweh Rohi. And when we talk about the name of Yahweh, this is the name of the Old Testament God. And you know, as sacred as the name is, people could not even utter this name during their time. And so, in the succeeding translations of the Old Testament, they changed it from Yahweh Rohi to Adonai Rohi. para lang kahit papaano mabanggit ng mga tao yung pangalan ng Panginoon. Because again, that is a very sacred name that is not even worth mentioning because yung mga taong nagsasalita in comparison to whom they are talking to ay napakalayo. He is a holy God na dapat hindi natin mabanggit ang kanyang pangalan. That's why it says here, Yahweh Rohi. In latter translations, it said, Adonai Rohi. The Lord, Yahweh. Kilala po ni David ang kanyang Panginoon. He is the God of the Old Testament, the God who made him to be the king of Israel, and the God who was with him, even in trials and tribulations. And then you have the word is here. Is here is the verb in the present form, right? Hindi po sinabi rito ni King David na the Lord was my shepherd. Ang binanggit niya po, the Lord is my shepherd. It doesn't necessarily follow na kapag payapa lang yung mundo niya, ang Panginoon ang kanyang pastol. But here, ang sabi niya, the Lord is my shepherd. Despite of his son trying to overthrow him, ang sabi niya pa rin, ang Panginoon ang aking pastol. Kahit na ano ang sitwasyon. And then you have here the pronoun my. And when you say my, this is a first-person pronoun. Diba? Pag sinabi nating first-person pronoun, you talk about your affinity to the object of the sentence. Right. Halimbawa po, pag sinabi kong, she is a mother. I am just describing that she is a mother. Pero pag sinabi kong, she is my mother, that talks about my affinity to the woman who is my mother. That's why, nung sinabi rito ni King David na the Lord is my shepherd, he knows very well who his Lord is. He knows very well who his shepherd is. He has a personal encounter, a personal experience of the Lord blessing him in spite and despite of the circumstances. And then you have here, shepherd. This was how David described Adonai. He described him as the shepherd. And this speaks of David's description of Yahweh. Yahweh Rohi, Adonai Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. But what is a shepherd in the Old Testament? Next slide, please. When we talk about being a shepherd, of course, we know that David knows very well what a shepherd looks like, what a shepherd is like, what a shepherd does, because he once was a shepherd. Right. And this is how David saw God in his life. A shepherd is a provider. The shepherd is a guide. He's a provider, providing nourishment and rest for his sheep. The shepherd is also a guide, leading where the sheep should go. David saw Adonai as a shepherd to him in two opposing circumstances. The Lord is my shepherd in Psalm 23. In triumphs and in tribulations. That's why when we are going to outline Psalm 23, dalawang seasons ito na binibigkas ni King David. In triumphs and tribulations, in the best of times, and in the worst of times. In verses 1 to 3, makikita nyo doon yung the best of times na binabanggit ni King David. But Yahweh Adonai did not change even in the worst of times. And you can see this in verses 4 and 5. Now let's look at this one. Ang sabi po rito, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. You see here, when we talk about the Lord making us lie down in green pastures, you talk about abundance, right? And you know that there are times when the pasture is not green. The pastures are not green all the time. The water is not always still. The soul is not always at rest. And sometimes, the direction is not always clear. But here, you will see the words from King David. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Lying down in green pastures is a testament of the abundance that God can give us. The abundance of God is definitely reflected in this sentence. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And then you have here, He leads me beside still waters, talking about the peace of God that He can give us, and the peace from God that He can give us just the same. Then He says here, He restores my soul. Katulad po ng binanggit ko kanina, the soul is not always at rest. But here King David is saying, He restores my soul. He is the one who gives me peace. Remember again that this was a time that he was being overthrown as the king of Israel, but in spite and despite of the circumstance, he was saying, He restores my soul. He gives me peace. He leads me beside quiet waters. You see, ang hirap kaya magpahinga kapag hindi payapa ang isip. In despite of the circumstances, ang sabi ni David, Yahweh Rohi, Adonai Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. Guides me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. No, sometimes the direction is not clear. But even while David was being overthrown by his own son, ang sabi niya dito, He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. The direction is still very clear. Here's what King David was saying. Since the Lord is our shepherd, He will supply our needs, He will give us peace, and He will give us rest, and He will guide us where He leads. Then you will see here the opposing spectrum of this verse. Next slide, please. And it says here, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then the succeeding verses state, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You see here that the tone started shifting. Dahil biglang sinabi ni King David, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And here, most probably, if we're going to look at this context again, he is referring to his son Absalom trying to overthrow him as the king of Israel. Ano nga ba ang nangyari at sino nga ba itong si Absalom? Next slide, please. Now, if we are going to look at Absalom, his story can be found in the Old Testament, in the book of 2 Samuel. And Absalom was one of the sons of King David. And because of his greed, he decided to plot against his father, King David, to be the king of Israel. And so what David did when he heard of the plot against him, he fled to Jerusalem and went to Gilead. And when David was hiding in Gilead, this is when he wrote Psalm 23. Absalom ordered his people to kill David's people so that his father can be overthrown. And no choice si King David, kailangan niyang lumaban. But, ang sabi ni King David, yes, we will clash with the enemies, but do not harm Absalom. Despite of the circumstance, ang sabi niya, huwag niyong gagalawin ang aking anak. Despite of the circumstance, David's army prevailed in that battle where 20,000 people died. 20,000 tao po ang namatay sa labanan na iyon. At itong si Absalom, habang siya po ay nakasakay sa isang mule, ang mule po is a crossbreed between a donkey and a horse. Okay? So, nakasakay siya sa mule, and then what happened was, kasi the description of Absalom in the scriptures is that he's a very handsome guy. And what made him even more handsome was his hair, kasi ang haba ng buhok niya. Kaya lang po, habang nakasakay siya sa mule, sumabit yung kanyang buhok sa branch ng isang puno, at tumakbo yung mule, at siya po ay naiwan na nakahang doon sa may puno. And then what happened was, si Joab po, one of the soldiers of King David saw him and his man. And what they did was they killed Absalom. Absalom was killed because of his greed. Ang sabi ni King David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So when you talk about, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, you talk about God's protection. You are with me, Lord. You will protect me. When he said, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Next po, hindi natin nakikita. Ayun, nakikita nyo ba? Ako lang pala hindi nakakakita doon. Labo mata, sorry po. Okay, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. When you talk about the rod and the staff of a shepherd, it speaks of the guidance. Diba? May rod, yung shepherd. Right? You talk about the guidance coming from God. And he said, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You see the confidence that David has here. A table before me in the presence of my enemies. Why was he confident? Because Adonai Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then he said, you anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. When you talk about the anointing of oil in the Old Testament, it speaks of God giving purpose, giving a calling. And David here reminded of his calling to be the king of Israel and the protector of the Israelites. Ang bayang pinili ng Panginoon. He remembers that he was anointed by God to live out his calling. And then he said, you anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. God is my portion. You see, David knows that despite of the enemy's attempts to overthrow him, the Lord is a shepherd. And as God is his portion, he will not lack. The shepherd will supply his needs in the midst of his troubled circumstance. And here comes the conclusion in Psalm 23. Sabi dun sa conclusion, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David was saying that in the good times, in verses 1 to 3, and even the worst of times, the goodness of God will follow him all the days of his life. And you see the last sentence in the conclusion? This was the commitment of David to Adonai. This was the commitment of David to Yahweh. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord. What was the qualifier here? Forever. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Remember that Psalm 23 can be summarized in the first two sentences of this passage. Psalm 23 verse 1, which says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What does it mean when we say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want? Nung ako po'y nag-aaral nito, what I did was to look at the different translations in the Bible ng Psalm 23 verse 1. And you will be able to see this in your screen. The Lord is my shepherd. Nakikita na po ba natin? Next po. In the English Standard Version, King James, and NASB, the New American Standard Bible, ang sabi po doon, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In the New International Version, ang translation po was, I lack nothing. In the New Living Translation, I have all that I need. In the Good News Translation, I have everything I need. Pero ito po yung pinakagusto ko sa lahat, yung translation ng The Passion. Ang sabi po sa translation na ito, I always have more than enough. I always have more than enough. Siyempre po, tinignan ko yung Tagalog. Nahiya naman po ako, hindi natin banggitin dito yung translation sa Tagalog. Ng Psalm 23 verse 1, ang sabi dito, si Yahweh ang aking pastol, hindi ako magkukulang. Can you repeat this with me? Si Yahweh ang aking pastol, hindi ako magkukulang. You see, Psalm 23 is summarized in this verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But what does it mean when we say, the Lord is my shepherd, I always have more than enough? What does it mean to have more than enough? You see, here lies the issue of contentment in the life of a believer. And when you talk about contentment, this is a heart issue. This is an issue of the heart. It's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of how we look at life. When you look at this picture on your screen, you see two glasses of water. One is half full, and the other is half empty. May pagkakaiba sa laman? Wala. But when we look at life as half full, then we say, Lord, thank you because you have filled me and you are filling me. But when you look at life as half empty, you're always looking at the things that we lack instead of counting our blessings. This is a litmus test of how we view life as God's people, as God's children. Ang dami na ba? Or kulang pa? Contentment is an issue of the heart, and it reflects how we see God in our lives. You see, if there is one person in the New Testament that is personifying the idea of contentment, I would say that it would be the Apostle Paul. We know that 1/3 of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul. And one of the books that he wrote was the book of Philippians. This was a letter that he wrote to the church at Philippi. And we know that when he wrote this passage, where was he? He was in prison. But you know that even though he was in prison, we know that the theme of this book is very joyous. Napakasaya ni Apostol Pablo. Paano ka magsasaya kung ikaw ay nasa kulungan? Right? But then again, you look at life here from the perspective of Apostle Paul. Ang sabi niya rito in Philippians chapter 4, 11b to 13, and I'm using the New International Version, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. You see, the Apostle Paul learned that God is sufficient in every circumstances. Hindi lang po na sa panahon na siya ay malaya, kundi even sa panahon siya po ay nakakulong. You see, contentment in God is finding our sufficiency in God despite of the circumstances. As I said a while ago, the Apostle Paul here wrote Philippians as a letter to the Christians at Philippi to thank them for helping him in the ministry at sa mga tulong na natatanggap niya while he was still in prison. Contentment here is anchored on the truth that the Apostle Paul believed that God will provide for him in any circumstances. In lack, in need, in abundance, in abasement. Paul is teaching us here that our happiness, our gratitude, and our contentment is not dependent in our situation, but is anchored on who Adonai Rohi is in our lives. You see, contentment in God is the key to a peaceful life, wherever you are, whatever the circumstances. In verse 12 po, dito sa may Philippians chapter 4, ang sabi po dito, I have learned the secret of being content. You see, I have learned the secret in the original translation in Greek was memuamai. The word was memuamai, and this is translated as I have learned the secret. But memuamai is actually a word that is related to the word mysterion in Greek, which is translated as mystery. And for people who do not understand the Apostle Paul saying that he has learned the secret of being content, contentment will remain a mystery. The truth is, contentment is a mystery. Contentment is definitely a mystery. It's only possible in our patient submission to God's provision, in abundance and in abasement, in triumphs and tribulations, even in our successes and in our sorrows. You see, Psalm 23 is a mystery waiting to be unlocked in all of us. When we say Adonai Rohi in Psalm 23, we say that the Lord is our shepherd. But have we unlocked the mystery of this passage in our lives? The secret of being content. You know, in Psalm 23, we will be seeing 11 names of God here. Labing isa po sa napakaraming pangalan ni Yahweh ang makikita ho natin sa Psalm 23. And here, titingnan po natin sila isa-isa. The first one is Jehovah Ra'ah. The Lord is my shepherd. And then you have Jehovah Jireh. God is our provider. When David said, I shall not want. Jehovah Shalom. God is our peace. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Jehovah Rapha. God is our healer. He restores my soul. Next, Jehovah Chidkenu. God is our righteousness. When he said, he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And then when he said, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is present. And then Jehovah Ezer, God is our help. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Dami, no? This is the mystery waiting to be unlocked, that if we just know and understand, we will learn the meaning when David said, Adonai Rohi. Then we have here Jehovah Nisi. God is our victory. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. And then you have Jehovah M. Kadesh. God is our holiness. You anoint my head with oil. God is our holiness. And then the last two names of God, Jehovah Mana. God is our portion. My cup runs over. And this is the last name of God in Psalm 23. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God is our inheritance, Jehovah Shelek. How can we not be content when God has already given us everything in Him and with Him? You see, Jesus Christ was called as the true shepherd in the New Testament. In John chapter 10, verses 11 and 14, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And in John chapter 10, verse 27, ang sabi niya, my sheep hear my voice. I know them. And they follow me. You see, we are God's children. We are His sheep. And may we learn to listen and to follow the voice of Jesus, our one true shepherd, because in Him, we have everything we need. Pwede ko po bang angyayahan ng lahat na tumayo? And let us recite this passage one more. Unlocking the mystery of Psalm 23. Sabayan niyo po ako at basahin natin. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As we end, I do hope and pray that if there is going to be one takeaway that we are going to have at least this morning, is this: unless we understand that the Lord is our shepherd, nothing will ever be more than enough for us.